Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Mic on? Can't see the guy here. Just got to wait for recording. Thank you very much, councillors, visitors and those that are listening online. Welcome to our council meeting today. I have two apologies today, Councillor Sowd and Councillor Cox, and a reminder that those who are here with mobile phones, if you could switch them off, as it can interfere with our recording, and we do want to be able to record, and those at home want to be able to listen, so, or in their office, wherever they may be. So please be seated. Thank you. Just in the mayoral acknowledgements, I do want to take some time to acknowledge the amazing Ariana Titmus, and I think her quote, which has been all over the telly, it's also the front page of a newspaper, which is a different one. I'm just from a small town, which I don't agree is just a small town. We are the very best town, anyway, city, in Tassie, and this goes to show that if you believe you can do something, you can 100% do it if you work for it. And I think that's so important and so a great statement, and to anybody out there that wants to aspire to do something to be great, we do have to work for it as well. It's not just all talent. I'm sure that comes into it. You need the gifts and talent, but you do need to be able to work at it, and that's important for all of us. And I just want to mention that it's a great achievement, 2 gold medals at this stage. I'm sure there could be another 1 or 2, and which would be fantastic. And the Deputy Mayor has got a notice of motion of how we'll honour her or recognise her coming up in the not too distant future. So probably the next council meeting, I'd say. So that's just a statement, and I think we all congratulate her and wish her the best in the rest of the meet. Declaration of interest. Councillor Sosnicek.
9.3.
9.3, thank you. Any other declaration of interest? Confirmation of minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of July? Deputy Mayor, Councillor Spencer, second. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present. That is carried. No deputations and no petitions. Community reports. We do have a community report from Ms Lauren Harper, Events, Community and Fundraising for Rural, Alive and Well. Lauren, if you're there.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, Mayor Veston and the councils, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to share about the work Rural, Alive and Well does across Tasmania and your local community. Rural, Alive and Well has been a statewide organisation for the past 13 years, operating in remote and rural communities with a focus on suicide prevention. As an organisation, we believe that the way that we can achieve our mission of building healthy and resilient rural communities is by making mental health and wellbeing practical and tangible. Whilst most people are now aware of what depression and anxiety and other situational stresses are, we find the gap is that people don't know what they can practically do to build their resilience and capacity during their better times. We want people to be prepared with skills and positive habits so that when life gets a little bit harder, they're less likely to hit bottom. Raw has 4 tailored non-crisis support programs that we deliver across remote and rural communities and local industries. Raw Country, our first one, and this one's our main one. So they're our team on the ground. They're out in our communities, on farms, at the stockyards, in the shearing shed, and working one-on-one with people who need support during challenging times. Last financial year, Raw Country team had over 5,000 meaningful conversations with people either face-to-face or on the phone. This works out to be an average of 13 people or conversations per day. Whilst Raw Country doesn't operate directly within Launceston City Council, a lot of the people who we are helping stay connected have ties to city's core businesses, schools and industries. Raw Connect is our 1300 helpline or 1300 helpmate, and this makes it easy for people to help get connected to the right service. The feedback we hear all the time is how hard it is to get connected to the right people. With an array of service providers within the market space, there's been confusion surrounding who offers what service, and ultimately this builds barriers for people reaching out for help. It's our hope that through Raw Connect, it will be a part of the solution. 22% of the people that we worked with last year, we ended up being able to refer through to a clinical service provider for further support. Raw Connect is available to anyone regardless of their location in Tasmania. So if you're concerned for someone else's mental health and wellbeing, the team are there to help and they're available 24/7. Raw Workplace, our third program, that's our social enterprise model, and this delivers the mental health and wellbeing programs and packages to businesses and individuals. The most popular program we have is the Mental Health First Aid Accreditation program and also the peer support programs for workplaces. And last but not least is our Raw Industry. So these guys provide mental health and wellbeing programs tailored towards Tasmanian industries. Currently we operate in the seafood industry, which is stay afloat, and the timber industry, which is cutting through. The team deliver the programs, they're skilled and passionate about their industry. They have a real heart for seeing a positive change in the way their industries view and manage health and wellbeing of their workers and their families. Due to the success and demand of these existing programs, we're currently developing new programs, and these will be delivered across the Tasmanian transport industry and the local sporting communities. This is just a snapshot of what we do at Raw and across the last year of what we've been working on. And we've got some flyers coming there just in transit at the moment, so I'll be able to drop them off in the coming few weeks. But I just would love to hand it over to you guys if you have any questions about what we do or about any of our programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you for your time to come here.
That's all right.
And I'm sure the councillors can contact you if they have any questions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. So then we move on to public question time. We do have the public questions on notice, which are there. Those to read, and the answers are there. Public question without notice. Any? Microphone on, sorry. Public questions without notice.
This is becoming a habit. Sue Rafferty, Mowbray. I suppose that by now you're getting sick of the sight of me whining on about Veolia, which is, I guess, for you, done and dusted. Well, no, it's not. The residents of Invermay deserve better. I've seen that questions on notice that I've put in over the weeks get included on the agenda, answered by the executive in advance, and they get passed over in this meeting without comment. Questions without notice mean that you have to listen to me for 5 minutes.
No, we don't. We are just for the question, thank you.
I'm getting there.
Please do.
I've been studying the Environmental Impact and Attenuation Code for answers, which I found aren't there, to previous questions. I see that 4.0 of this attenuation code states the desire to protect sensitive uses, predominantly residential, from conflict with more commercial or industrial activities is one of the underlying objectives of the planning process. This applies to the situation in Churchill Park Drive. So what specific performance criteria within the attenuation code are applicable to the Veolia site on Churchill Park Drive? That is question 1.
Yeah, we'll take that on notice, thank you.
Question 2, in reference to the attenuation code, 2.1.5, what is the attenuation distance between the facility boundary and the nearest residences? As this information is not available regard Churchill Park Drive.
We'll have to take that on notice too, thank you.
And question 3, would councillors take a moment over the next while to watch a YouTube video called Watermaster? One word. It's a Finnish company that make a dredge. It's well worth your while. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors will take note of that. Any other questions from the public?
Hello, John Ball, South Launceston. Dear Mayor and Councillors, for nearly 50 years we've lived at 29 Gascoigne Street in a pleasant area with trees and gardens, but in the last few years we've progressively lost most of this to infill housing in Wheaton Avenue. The green spaces, shrubs and trees have gone, as have the birds and their song. Instead, we look out at a sea of rooftops. As a retired doctor, I'm well aware of all the evidence showing that the natural world is of crucial importance to our mental health and to the relief of stress in a progressively stressful society, and these natural surroundings are really needed. These new houses, like the one over our back fence, are crammed onto a block with no space for proper gardens or for children to play, not even spaces for a small trampoline in some cases. We know the well-documented damage of too much screen time for children and no outside activity. These infill houses remove the choice. The subsequent increase in vehicular traffic and noise, with footpaths obstructed by parked cars, further reduces our amenity. My questions are, to what extent does our council have the power to address the concerns of the ratepayers? To what extent? And the second one is, have you an example, a plan for a local playground, as there is not one in the area? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. The second one we'll take on notice, because that one, the first one, CEO, do you wish to answer?
I can answer that to a point, but we can certainly give you more information, I guess, afterwards. But certainly, the density or the development density that's allowable now within the zones is prescribed by the Tasmanian Planning Scheme, which you will have noted from years gone by is actually now being standardised across the whole of state. So there were planning directives that were implemented across the state that actually changed the council's prior planning scheme with respect to what we allowed by way of density of units in particular streets. And so our control now really rests with being able to administer that planning scheme in the best way that we're able to. Really, yeah, so that's the answer to the question.
And we'll take the second one on notice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Robin Weston from Kings Meadows. The reason I'm here today, and you would have all heard from me by email, and thank you very much to the people that responded to my email. It's in regard to the development application in 7 Wheaton Avenue that's on your agenda today. I am new to Tasmania, only 3 years. My husband and I moved here, making this our forever home. We had a look into the zoning when we moved here to find that we were moving or buying a house in the general residential area. There was no inkling at that point that we were going to be blindsided by the amount of residential infill around us. We can't move now. We spent $100,000, so we've poured $100,000 of our own money into the building industry here to create a place for people, a single occupancy home within our home that has not interfered with the footprint whatsoever of our home at all. So we are sympathetic to the around the housing issue within Tasmania.
Have you got a question?
I do have a question. I'm interested in with the new planning scheme, which I hear is now going to even loosen up the requirements of building even further. And I understand that this is, as was just noted, a statewide initiative by the government. My question is, does the local council government here in Launceston have any say on how residential areas are zoned here?
Yeah, we make recommendations to the Tasmanian Planning Commission and then they approve or refuse it. So we do have an input in the beginning.
Okay, so with the new planning scheme coming, is there an opportunity at this point for you to have an influence over where those areas are currently zoned and any changes to that zoning?
You answer that, Richard? Richard will answer that one. With the new scheme? You will need that mic, yeah. Or the one down there.
The Launceston's new planning scheme, or the local provisions for the planning scheme, are actually on exhibition at the moment, and we are calling for the public to make submissions to that. We're running a number of drop-in sessions this week, and I think there may well be one in Kings Meadows. I'd have to check, but later in the week. And if you've got any questions about how you can get involved, we'd invite you to come down there and speak to the planning team, and we can talk you through how you make a submission. Once the submissions are made, and we expect to get hundreds of them, the council will consider each of those, and as mentioned by the mayor, we'll make a recommendation on the merits of those, and that will go forward to the Tasmanian Planning Commission to be determined and the scheme finally brought in.
Okay, may I respond to your answer?
Sorry?
May I respond to that answer? May I respond to that answer?
No, it's just question time. It's not really statement time. If you've got another question, you may.
Okay, so how seriously will the council take the public consultation feedback?
We take it very seriously.
Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Any further questions? Thank you. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in the agenda under item number 9, Planning Authority. So first of all, we have 9.1. We do have a speaker for 9.1. Is that Chloe or Line?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Chloe Line, 178 Charles Street. Mayor Van Zetten, Alderman, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Unfortunately, the proponents are unable to be here due to travel restrictions, so I shall speak on their behalf. It is an exciting application that you have before you to consider, and one which will build on the growing tourism popularity of our city and the university relocation. Yes, the building is taller than its immediate surrounds, but certainly not out of context with the broader evolving city streetscape, and the design with the recessed upper storeys enables the building to sit within the immediate streetscape context in terms of scale. The application before you follows a previous design from the same proponents, which was withdrawn from consideration by Council following matters raised by objectors during the advertising period. The new design has taken on board some of the issues raised and I believe is sympathetic to the site and its heritage context. Further issues were raised during the advertising period for this design, and following discussions between the project architect and council officers, proposed condition 2 requires amended plans which will address concerns about the arch-shaped windows and requires rectangular windows in their place for levels 3 to 5. Another issue that was raised through the objection process is that of the capacity and safety of Cimetière Street. Both the project engineers and the council's engineering staff are comfortable that the additional traffic generated is within the capacity of Cimetière Street. Car parking has been addressed in an ingenious manner as it has recognised the site has limitations in terms of capacity to provide on-site parking. A condition of permit clearly requires the operators to maintain 19 off-site valet parking spaces whilst the hotel is operating. I trust that Alderman will adopt the recommendation to approve the application and enable this project of enlivening this vacant site to proceed to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the only speaker I have. Any other speakers? No? Thank you. 9.1. Someone happy to move 9.1? Councillor McKenzie moved. Seconded. Councillor Harris. Councillor McKenzie, you wish to speak to it?
Thanks, Mayor, and I sort of note that this is the third time this one's come up for DA approval, and we've approved 2 previous applications on this site. And again, looking through and having read the representations in relation to the matter at hand, I've taken on board all of the issues, and I think the planners in many cases have done so as well. I guess I particularly look at the one that was put forward by Ian Borsma, who actually sits on our Heritage Advisory Council and also sits on works for Heritage Tasmania. So therefore has some insight, I think, into the issues, and certainly a man who does a lot of work to protect the heritage of the city that we live in today. And I also note a number of the other comments made by other representors. I guess there are 3 or 4 key issues I think that are made in relation to it. 1 is the height. 2 is the traffic, and 3, car parking. And I'll just deal with those all in the order of the height. And the height, again, is one of those sort of things that's relative to the area that it exists in, and I think we've got precedents that have been shown through looking at the Gorge Hotel and then furthermore the Fragrance Hotel in relation to how height is perceived in and around the city. We've got a 12-metre height limit. This one's requesting to go to 20 metres. I guess if we look around the projects that have been approved in recent times in the area, including the car park, which is directly behind it, which is approximately the same height as the hotel will be. The university, a couple of hundred metres down the road in Willis Street, I think goes to about 19.7, so close enough to 20 metres there. The Fragrance Hotel within sort of another 200 or 300 metres, which has been approved at 40 metres. The Verge Hotel, which is a similar size structure. So in a relative sense, the height structures in and around, and of course the retort for the old gasworks as well, which is over the 20-metre height. So there are a number of buildings that reference a height scale for this particular building in and around there. And I think, as our officers explained this morning, this is an evolving streetscape from an industrial, changing itself into something which is a much more different site and more usable site, and actually adding amenity to the area, I think, in what they're doing. Whether you like the design or don't like the design, I guess is always a moot point in relation to the way people do things, and I know there's been conversations about having a design concept put over it. I will not stand here and talk to design because I'm probably the last person that should do that. But I will say, I think the way that they've referenced it, one of the other things was its reference to its other buildings, and in relation to the height of this building, there are 2 buildings right beside it, which are around about the 2-storey level, and this one references it by saying at the streetscape they're roughly the same height as this building, and it sets back 3 metres before it scales up to its final height. They are continuing to want to use the old bricks and to put those in place, and I note the comments made by Mr Borsma to try and protect those bricks for future reuse should the use of the property change. And I know that the council have come back and given some consideration as to how we might be, rather than using normal mortar cement, which might have some impact on those historic bricks. So there's been a lot of work there, and even with the facade, the greenery that goes up there, which is going to break down some of the mass from the street. I note that some of the conditions are to work out how they're going to water the plants, and the type of plants and things like that are sort of conditioned into the approval for that, to make sure that we don't put a lot of dead plants up there and they don't die within 5 minutes because they forgot to put a watering system in. So I think all of those things have been conditioned appropriately in relation to that. The next one to deal with is traffic. As we all know, that Esplanade area is a very busy area and a lot of traffic going in there. Hence, you can only enter the property left-hand in, and you can only exit the property left-hand out. So the reality of it is, yes, it's a busy street, but there are other places that people come onto that street along that stretch as well. The reality of it is our traffic engineers have reviewed that and taken on board and reviewed it based on the application, or based on the representations that were put forward by others, and have determined that the street can cope with that additional traffic amount. The third area I just wanted to look at was the car parking. This building is being built without adequate car parking being on site. And I think, as officers have again said this morning to us and highlighted in the documentation that we've had to review, is that it's conditioned on having 19 other car parking spaces somewhere else that they need to actually have secured before the hotel can become operational. So therefore it's conditioned on where they get those 19 car spaces is up to them. We're not conditioning that they must have them and tell us where they are today. Clearly there is a car park to be designed behind. So
excuse me, Councillor McKenzie, your time is up.
I'm just about to finish there.
Okay, thank you.
Reasonable to assume that. So I believe that all of the conditions have been met, the performance criteria have been assessed and appropriately dealt with, so I'll be voting for this today.
Thank you. Councillor Harris has a question.
Yes, a question for the planning officers, if I can. I understand there are already a number of DAs existing on this site. Does this new DA replace those and supersede them, or are in fact all of them currently available to the developer to choose which one he's going to which one he's going to build?
Duncan.
Thank you, Councillor. The existing permits that have been issued recently for the previous two developments that have come to Council, they remain valid. The first one was acted upon with the demolition of the cottages, so that application remains valid forever and a day. The other permit will lapse in another year or so unless they renew it, and there's two options for them to renew further. So the second permit remains valid for another 4 years, but obviously they can only build one.
While I've got you there, I might ask another question. That's the four-storey office building DA is what's also currently valid then? That's the one, or is it for the 135-room hotel?
Both.
This is 134, so I'm not saying it's the same one. So you're saying there's two current DAs, and this will be a third current DA? I thought what we were doing was they weren't proceeding with the 135 and they were now proceeding with 134 rooms.
The most recent application has been withdrawn and replaced by this current one.
Right, so that was 135 rooms. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So there was 30 multiple dwellings.
Yep.
That was the structure approved in 2017 and that permit was acted on. And there was a four-storey office building in 2019 that was approved, and so that remains valid. So potentially the owners of the site can then choose which of the three, assuming today's gets approved, which of the three.
Thank you for clearing that up. I was sort of unaware that even though they'd knocked the cottages down, that they also had the approval to build the units in addition to an approval to build office space, now chasing a third approval to build a hotel.
That's correct.
Thank you. Just a very simple question regarding the front entrance archway. Some people in the public have said that doesn't look big enough to take necessary service vehicles to go through there. What's the height of the arch and is it sufficient for service build vehicles to go in there?
The short answer is yes, it's adequate to allow the service vehicles to get in.
Yep, but not buses?
No buses are likely to try and get into that car park.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Harris?
I will briefly. I think Councillor McKenzie has summed it up nicely. There are three, this will be the third DA on the site. As he said about the car parking, I also had same concerns, but as we have conditioned this particular development application to him to find the other 19 spots, then 34 spots is all, 36 spots I think is what must be provided on the site. It is just outside the exclusion zone where they wouldn't have to provide any car parking, and whilst 34 or 36 parking spots might seem a small amount for 134 rooms, it is in fact what meets the planning scheme. So really we have nowhere else to go on that. As far as the height goes, a 6-storey building at 20 metres, it is set back. It is reusing the old bricks. It isn't trying to dominate the streetscape. As others have said, this is a changing part of Launceston, and I'm happy to support the development application we've got in front of us.
Yep, thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I won't repeat any of the things that previous councillors have said, only to say that I think this is welcome development in this part of Launceston. It's a little bit like the C.H. Smith building. You know, this holds a place in Launceston's psyche, having driven past it, seeing it various stages of decay. Now to have a third application which fits within the planning scheme, discretion's allowed, this gives an opportunity, I think, to give the community confidence that these kind of issues can be resolved within the planning scheme.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker, question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a question in regards to the various sort of permits and information that will be required before the building can operate as a hotel. There seems to be quite a long list of those. How does a member of the public who might have an issue with some of those actually object to that approval when today we're being asked to approve the development, not knowing the outcome of some of those provisions, and by the time those provisions and changes are made, whether it's to the windows or whatever, it's too late to seek to raise an objection.
Thank you. Duncan, you wish to answer?
Thank you again, councillors. It's very common, it's almost automatic that every application that comes to council is represented with a number of conditions, and it's quite common that some of those conditions require changes in the form of an amended plan to reflect one thing or another. At the last meeting we had a very similar example. In this case the required changes are essentially a change to the windows on the 3 levels above the podium level, or the first 3 of those 4 levels, to go from the arch to a rectangular form. That's probably the most important change. Those members of the public who lodged a submission in regard to the application have the opportunity to lodge an appeal following council's decision, and that's as far as that goes. Any other member of the public who didn't make a submission prior to this point, they don't have any further opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Any? Yeah. You wish to speak?
Further questions?
Question, yes?
Yeah, I suppose that, you know, reiterates the point that if someone has objected, and there's been a number of people who have objected for a variety of reasons. No, I'm just responding to that answer, which is, it would appear then that after today's decision, these people have 2 weeks to respond to the approval, but still not knowing the necessary outcomes of that approval. So what I'm saying is, if today this is approved, in 2 weeks' time, that opportunity is no longer available to challenge the decision, and yet we won't know the outcome of many of those provisions, including things such as the shape of the windows, but also, you know, the parking, the vegetation, and a number of conditions that have been placed upon the building. They may be all resolved to great satisfaction to everyone concerned, but they may not, I suppose.
So what's the question, please?
The question is, what avenue do those people have at that point in 2 weeks' time?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The advice to anyone that has, and should the council make a decision to approve it today, and they have concerns with any of the conditions that would be applied to the permit, really the advice is that they would need to raise that with the Resource Management and Planning Appeals Tribunal within the appeal period, because as you say, there isn't a legislative way to be able to engage people outside of the application beyond that in any legal sense.
Thank you. So, any other speakers? Oh.
Another question.
Another question. Thank you.
So, you know, I would. It is very similar, as someone mentioned. I think someone from the planning team that you know, 2 weeks ago we were in a similar situation with the Old Colonial Motor Inn, where we were approving something that we don't know the final outcome of. You know, we can have a fair idea, and it may be achieved. But I suppose my question is, how long, with this particular development application, do we have in which to approve this before it becomes deemed an automatic approval?
If you read the notes, it's deemed approval 30th of July. It's right in front of you. Any other speakers? You speak, Councillor Walker.
Yes, I will speak to this development application, Mayor, and thank you for pointing that out, that again we're in a situation where we have the whole 24 hours in which to approve this before it becomes deemed an automatic approval. This is part of the problem, that we have people who are concerned, rightly so, people who, you know, have knowledge in this area, whether it be, you know, design, whether it be, you know, things that, you know, I may or may not know about, or people around this table may or may not know about, but obviously of importance to them and of importance to the community, but we don't have the answers to those questions yet, and yet we're being asked to approve. Yes, certainly when it comes to the height, it's quite specific that our current planning scheme, thank you, Mayor, our current planning scheme does require that this be built at a height of 12 metres, or that it relates to its surrounding area. And I note within the 100 metres surrounding that area that there is no building of this height or anywhere near this height, and indeed it's noted in the report that most buildings are of 2 storeys in this area. So this is something that councillors have to consider. Does it actually comply with the planning scheme in that regard? There are, of course, other approvals in the area, and I'm told that those approvals can be taken into account, but again, I'm not sure that any of those are within that 100 metres of the surrounding area. Indeed, the planning scheme asks that this building relates specifically to its streetscape. Now, some might argue that it does do that insofar as the first couple of floors do step back and do pay some homage to the idea that there are 2-storey buildings in that street. But of course, there's not the design quality or design response in the rest of the building in terms of breaking up surfaces. The best that we're being offered here is a few plants. I don't think plants are in the planning scheme as far as mitigating designs which don't fit the planning scheme. So I think that is problematic in this case, that we're relying on some plants to do the work of what the planning scheme requires. Yeah, there is quite a mass to the building, and I do acknowledge that the developers have made that effort to step the building back, and that's something that is generally agreed to be desirable. But what we end up with is a hybrid, or a pastiche, if you like, not so much a historical pastiche, which I don't think anyone wants either, but we end up with a pastiche where someone is trying to maximise the use of the footprint, but in an area that generally doesn't have buildings of a similar ilk. Of course, we do have the issue of car parking, and we're told that the hotel, if it's to be built, has to provide these extra spaces. We don't know where they are. We don't know what other issues that will bring, and we don't know, you know, the outcome of that. Theoretically, the council would not allow this building to trade if those places weren't secured. That may happen. I don't know if that's ever happened before on this council, where we've actually insisted on someone not being able to operate a business on their site because of those shortages, because I'm sure there'll be all sorts of other mitigating factors. There are other developments happening in the area, and therefore parking will be at a premium. And then, of course, there are other traffic issues, and I notice that one of the representations makes note of the traffic impact assessment being based on a 2% increase, and of course, yet at the same time we want to refer to all these other developments in the area and say, oh, well, this is part of a bigger picture. But we don't want to acknowledge that perhaps 2% is not an appropriate figure when it comes to the increase in traffic in the area. I suppose we could talk about it anecdotally and say that we all know that corner has got busier in the last few years. It will continue to get busier. Is it at 2%? Is it going to be at more? I'm not sure, but I do tend to agree with that representation, which is basically arguing that 2% is probably not a realistic figure anymore.
Thank you. Your time is up. Do you need an extension, Councillor Walker?
Yes, please, Mayor.
And second to Councillor Daking. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present. That is carried.
I'm sure one day you're not going to give me an extension, but I'll carry on anyway. So I won't be voting in favour of this development application. I find it, it's been alluded to in the discussions about this site, about the potted history that we've had to endure. Might not necessarily be the fault or the responsibility of the current developer, I don't know, but it is a long history. It's a bit of a sad history. It's an indictment of the failures to be able to protect our local heritage. Like I say, that's not necessarily the responsibility of this development or this developer, but quite simply, the height of this building is one that is beyond the realms of the planning scheme as we currently have it. We've seen examples of this elsewhere in Launceston, and we've seen, of course, that be supported by the tribunal. And while I accept a general suggestion that this area is developing, and it is great to see development in the area, it does not mean that that has to be at the expense of our city's profile, of our heritages, heritage buildings that currently exist. And I think that far more thought needs to be put into developments that are appropriate, height-wise, traffic-wise, and also parking-wise. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Daking.
Thank you, Mayor. Probably a question to Duncan, just in relation to some building materials for the property. I noticed we've got some recycled brick being used, which is fantastic, I think, on the lower floor. On the upper floor where we set back, it's proposed we're using light coloured bricks, metal, perforated metal sheet and metal mesh. Just wondering with the metal mesh, is that an off-the-shelf product, or would that be more of a design bespoke product?
Duncan.
Thank you. Don't know whether the mesh is going to be specifically made for this project or if it's off the shelf. Its principal purpose is to support the vines.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got a couple of little concerns about this one. For example, a question about the buses. If the bus loads of people, where will they unload the people to go into the motel? It's going to be a fair way away. And the second one is, will there be signs on the motel property that say do not turn right? Because we know it's been happening with tourists the last few weeks. We've got to be careful, and I think we should require signs on the properties as you drive out to not turn right, and possibly a sign on the other side to don't turn right into there. Or will a road have double lines or stop people doing it?
It'll be appropriately marked and signed.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, question?
Thanks, Mayor. Just in terms of a process question, we seem of late to be having lots of issues with regard to the requirement for amended plans to be submitted, and somehow that is taking away from the ability for councillors to make an informed decision. Could councillors be reminded of the ability and requirement for amended plans as per the case today, just as a reminder, if I'm correct, that is in fact a very standard component of the scheme.
Richard.
In determining planning decisions under delegation and in making recommendations to the council, the officers do from time to time and on a regular basis consider the need for small amendments to the plans to either bring the design into greater conformity with the screen, with the scheme. So, for example, screening of windows or similar things, sometimes screen planting or landscape plantings. Or in this case, this is where a design has been agreed with the applicants in response to issues that have been raised by representatives. And obviously that's another angle where obviously we've got an interest in, we're required to consider the representations. If those representations bring up issues of merit, we have the ability to try and reconcile them. If the applicant is happy to do that, that can trigger a requirement. I think that characterises the changes in this example. But there are other examples where small tweaks are required. If there's a choice between refusing a development or tweaking the design slightly to bring it into compliance, it's our preference to do that, and so we do from time to time require amended plans for that reason as well.
So you're being proactive. Thank you. Councillor Daking.
Thank you, Mayor. Just really quickly, I stand to fully support this application. It's fantastic to see this site hopefully finally be developed, and nice to see that they've obviously worked through over the last few applications with some certain representations and objections along the way. I think the result will be fantastic using the recycled brick, the design, and I look forward to a successful hotel operating there shortly for Launceston.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Priest.
Thank you for the discussion around the table this afternoon about the development in Boland Street. I could say that I appreciate seeing something built on the site. I've watched the destruction occur over the years. I love the two little cottages that were on the site. I thought they were a perfect example of our early built heritage. I won't be supporting the this development purely because I would like to see it lower. I think the area that the development is in is to relate to the language that seems to be occurring around developments in Launceston at the moment, the emerging streetscape. The problem with the emerging streetscape is we don't have a height limit that supports buildings over 12 metres, so it becomes our decision on what the heights are in the city. I think that it's a huge opportunity in that area at the moment with what's happening with UTAS, and we've got that beautiful esplanade and those lovely cream buildings going down past the back of Bogues there. I think it's highly significant in its value. It's like a funnel heading down Invermay Road, and I think that more consideration needs to be taken in regard to the types of building that we're looking at in the city, particularly where we're using that language of emerging streetscapes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Yeah, just briefly, thanks. I mean, comments have been made about the height and the reference and things that have been planned to build, haven't been built, but there are the retort at the gasworks, the Albert Hall, the gasworks skeleton itself, and the Verge Hotel, which are probably within 100 metres of there, or 100, 120 metres, which I think reference to that height level. I do take account that effectively approving these things starts to set the height in Launceston, and therefore when we reference the next building, we'll reference to this one, and I acknowledge comments that I think were probably being made at the other end of the table in relation to that. So I acknowledge that that is potentially what we're doing, because we can then use that as a precedent for doing something else and doing something else. But having said that, the reality is we do actually have relative height in and around there that exists currently before those developments do occur, and we have approved developments that will increase the height in and around that area. So I'm comfortable with that aspect of it. It is, in my view, a derelict site now and has been for some time, and I take the comments regarding the diminution of the site by losing of the cottages. Unfortunately, that was of no doing of the council. It's just one of those things that happened over time to a stage where those properties, and I think that's an unfortunate outcome where either people can't afford to maintain those properties or choose not to. so that they get an end outcome, which may be where we've ended up today. So I appreciate that how we've got there is not necessarily a status of the way I'd like to get to these sorts of arrangements, but having got to where we've got to, having already approved something of similar height, no, perhaps not quite the same height, but certainly of height in that area, I think it's endeavoured to reference itself to the street by that setback of 3 metres, which means that driving along the streetscape you'll find a building that sort of levels there and then the height comes back, and I think that's one of the things that we learnt from some of the height discussions that we've had previously about its reference to the actual street frontage is really important, and therefore the setbacks, which again some of the things we've seen today and other times are showing that builders are now starting to respect the streetscape and actually set things back behind the facade of the street, which I think is actually improvement and loses that real dominance of the streetscape. So I'm still going to support the building today. I did note a comment in relation to the flood levies. And I do note that we're actually, even though it's outside the flood levies, that there is certainly going to be a flood maintenance review in relation to this building. So I take that as being conditioned as well, so they have listened to those sorts of things. So I'll still be supporting it.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 3 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. 9.2. We do have a speaker for 9.2. Craig Stokes.
Good afternoon, my name is Craig Stokes. I'm at 22 Longwood Avenue in Newstead. We would like to build a shed on our nearly 15 acres we've got there for the primary purpose really of housing our personal stuff, caravan, boat, excavator, bits and pieces like that. I know that some people in the Newstead area are concerned about extra traffic up and down the street, and if you've ever driven up and down that street you'll know how tight that is. I don't contribute to that though. All my parking is off-street, actually on my property. There are a lot of houses up and down that street where nobody actually parks in the driveway and they all choose to park on the street because it's easier to get in and out. We only have a couple of work vehicles and we operate outside of normal traffic times, so I don't really think that we're going to contribute too much to that. And my business I've had my business for 15 years and our main base is actually in Smithton. Launceston is just a sub-branch and we probably get 1 delivery truck a week, if that, and I just would like to have an opportunity to build my shed and store my stuff. Thank you.
No, thank you. We did have a representation from Barb Rees passed on to us, so I take it councillors have read that. No, you're right, sorry. Any other speakers that are here? No? Thank you. So 9.2, somebody happy to move a motion? Move Councillor Spencer. Seconded Councillor Walker. Councillor Spencer, you wish to speak to it?
Yes, Mayor. I checked this one out this morning. Where this shed is actually going to go, it's well away from anyone. It can't be seen from any other properties. And I think it's down in the perfect location. Gentlemen, I've got a large shed and they are really good for, people's brains. I will be supporting this, providing it doesn't grow any bigger with more workers and vehicles. I cannot see a problem with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I certainly do rise to support this development application. Having visited the site this morning, it is an interesting piece of land and topography in general around the area. It is a residential area and yet this particular land is zoned differently, and I can appreciate the fact that the landowner wishes, to utilise the space that he does have. Most people would if they had substantial holdings such as that. It is certainly land that is, as evidenced today, slightly flood-prone in areas, so it's not going to be useful for many things. And generally speaking, I think that if the owner can utilise the land in such a way, it's a good thing. I can also appreciate the people who use that street. It is a reasonably narrow street. I would like to think that that the developer certainly remains cognisant of that over time, because this will allow him to utilise the street and his land more, but just to remain cognisant of those neighbours and of the narrow street. And in that respect, as a council, there may be some aspect where we could contribute to improving the access in that street over time, if that was possible. I don't know, because it's a strange combination of rural land, substantial rural land, and a small suburban street. I'm not sure if there's any other access to that land. I don't imagine so. So that being what it is, just that the developer remains cognisant of that and works with his neighbours to the best of that ability. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
I suspect the other aspect is by boat. Just I'm looking at this morning. Look, I rise to support the application as well. And the two issues were noise concerns and traffic concerns. I think the officers have addressed both of those in the responses that they've made in relation to those. Again, it is an unusual block of land. It's a rural resource block next to residential, but it sits down in a gully, so it's well away from things. So therefore, the reality is the only sight lines are going to be from actually Hobblers Bridge Road. Probably is the only place you'll see it. And I know it is in scenic management, so I think that's taken into consideration as well in relation to the approvals that were given. The property's been conditioned in a particular way for 2 vehicles, 1 bay, and that's the conditions on which we're approving today. So therefore, the other 4 bays are quite at liberty to be used for private purposes. The 1 bay is there to be used for business purposes, with the refrigeration in there, which I think the officers have explained how that noise suppression is in place for the refrigerated area. And so from my perspective, provided the proponent works in accordance with the conditions that are put around the permit, then I believe this will not create any additional issues for the residents of that area.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, obviously the 2 standards requiring council discretion are those of building height setback and that of scenic management, and both of those I think have been considered and responded to appropriately. They are different to the representors' concerns, and they've been alluded to by other people around the table. I think essentially what this comes down to is that if indeed the development application is not used as per the intent that it has been submitted and assessed against, is that council's compliance team will be onto the proponent. And so we encourage and remind the proponent that the word that has been put forward in terms of the use is indeed the word that has been taken in assessing it. And we hope that it is the word that is continued in terms of its ongoing use. It seems to me that the words that have been spoken here today, recorded today, are for someone to use that space for private storage and indeed the ability for 2 vehicles. And indeed, if that's not the case, then there'll be a process that will be unfolding.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer, wish to close?
Yes, I think there should be no more traffic in this street other than what these couple of cars will be. It can't grow anymore. There's no room for any other properties to come off this street. And I think I will be definitely supporting it. The road that goes down to this new shed, there's no mud that can come out of that onto the street. It's all blue metal. It looks like it's got a good base. And I'll definitely support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 9.3, we do have some speakers for 9.3. Corinna is, yes, leading. John Ball.
John's not here.
Sorry?
John's not here anymore.
And Robin Weston.
Hello again. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out. in relation to the report that you've received from the planning section. Could I draw your attention to 10.4.2b, which states that the setbacks and the building envelope for all dwellings provides consistency with the apparent scale, bulk, massing and proportion of dwellings. My understanding of this clause is that that is in proportion to the other dwellings that are around in that neighbourhood. Is that true? Can someone confirm that for me? Okay, all right. Well, I just want you to bring that to your attention because that's a two-storey dwelling. There's no other two-storey dwellings anywhere near that building. So that, to me, that's not consistent with the bulk and mass. The second thing is, draw your attention to 10.4.6c. The back of the building, which is the bit that adjoins our back fence, the window is on the second floor and it's a large kitchen window and people spend a lot of time at their kitchen. I believe this is going to reduce our private open space and the amenity in our yard. And I can't find anything in here that says, it says that it's going to be screened, but there's nothing in the plan that says it's going to be screened, and I really want that to happen because we're going to lose a lot of privacy in that part of our yard. Also, the developers in their response to the planning section said that they had assessed that the current vegetation along that boundary fence was sufficient and we would receive a minimal loss of amenity. Now, the shrubs in our yard on our side of the fence are not 6-8 metres tall. There are some trees, some birch trees, and there's a very large magnolia tree in the yard in 7 Wheaton Avenue that I have been told are going to be removed. So that is inconsistent with what they have said to the planning section.
Thank you.
We've spent $500 on massive trees to try and mitigate this situation.
Thank
So
you.
it's been at a cost to us. So I'd like you to have a look at those things.
Thank you. Councillors have heard that and they'll consider that in their discussion. So 9.3, there's no other speakers, I assume? Do I have? No. Thank you. So 9.3, somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor McKenzie moved. Councillor Harris second. Just to speak to a Councillor McKenzie.
Speak like these, I sort of feel like I'm the grunt that gets up and talk about these things. Again, I'm pleased to hear the representative speak and Dr. Ball, who spoke earlier. I actually encourage you to come today and talk about it because I guess we're continually being challenged by having to approve developments in backyards of properties in and around Launceston because that's what the planning scheme enables us to do. Lets us do. The comments made by Dr. Ball in relation to the loss of trees and amenity and therefore the birds in and around Launceston I have some sympathy for, particularly when you see a large magnolia tree and a Norfolk pine. Whether it's the appropriate tree for Launceston, I don't know, but the reality is the magnolia tree is a beautiful tree which goes as part of this development application, I believe, and therefore, you know, some trees of quite substance are disappearing from the viewscape, which is, I think, the comment made by Dr. Ball earlier. Having said that, we're here to act as a planning scheme and deal with the matters under the terms of the planning scheme, and if we look at our agenda and look at the issues of what the areas that we actually have any control over, and we look at page whatever. Of course, my computer's just been. Anyway, the amount of discretion that's in the building envelope is very small, and as a consequence of that, really, we have very little in the way of control over what we do. They don't need a permit to knock down trees within the area. They can do that under their own auspices, so whether we approve this or not, those trees could be removed tomorrow. It's sad that we do, but unfortunately, the way the development has been put forward in relation to, well, unfortunately for the people who live next door, but in relation to the planning scheme, and unfortunately as you go down Wheaton Avenue on the other side of the road today, we saw some other further developments that were being made in and around it. The reality of it is the planning scheme enables developments such as the one that's been put forward today to be approved on the basis of the way things are. And again, I have some lament that people don't want to have backyards, but the reality is that seems to be the way of the world, whether that's because they're wanting to spend more time indoors and not spending any time outdoors or maintaining gardens. That just seems to be a trend of the way it is. The planning scheme is established to enable that to happen, and unfortunately we're going to have more of these instances come before us. I think we're having them at regular intervals come to our table now, and there are many that don't come to our table because they don't get represented against. Whilst I feel for the people who live around, their amenity will be affected. Unfortunately, amenity, when you look under the planning scheme, is really relative to the hours of sunlight that you get on the 21st of July is the way that it's pretty well defined. I'm not sure that that's how I look at amenity and the way that I would look at things, but the reality of it is this is the way the planning scheme does, and under the confines of the planning scheme, I believe we don't have any choice but to approve this today.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. I perhaps will just ask the planning officer just to confirm what the window treatment will be for the kitchen window in the approval, whether it will in fact be something.
Richard.
I just refer the councillors to proposed condition 7, which requires a 1.7 metre high privacy screen to be erected along the southern side of the deck of Unit 2 and to the kitchen window facing the southern rear boundary to ensure reasonable privacy for the adjoining dwellings.
Thank you. You wish to speak, Councillor Harris?
Yeah, I will speak to it. As Councillor Mackenzie said, we do have a number of these, and in fact we have another one to follow, which is another house being built in the backyard of an existing property. And we've probably been doing this for the best part of 12 months, that we've had at least one, if not more, every council meeting to have to consider. The reality is this one is built into the bank in an attempt to lower the height. Whilst Robin is over the back fence and is concerned about her privacy, I think opaque glass was being suggested for the kitchen window so that they won't be able to sit and look out into your private open space. And I did notice that that house is actually raised from the ground rather than being dug in. So whilst it's not technically a two-storey house, it certainly is raised above the ground level in certain parts of the block. Like Councillor Mackenzie said, it is unfortunate that we see the reduction of trees in our suburban landscape. I certainly grew up surrounded by gum trees and various others, and now those houses, there are houses everywhere and very few trees. I guess over time people are likely to plant the trees back. They probably shouldn't plant back the Norfolk pine, because I do think that's possibly an unsuitable tree for a residential block, but they do look wonderful, and it was certainly nice to see it as we came down Wheaton Avenue, but I think that will go in regard to building of the new garage at the front of the existing house. And I think the concession where the eaves of this house is into the building envelope is perhaps difficult to pick from the plans, but in fact it is just a very, very small transgression into the building exclusion zone, and it certainly isn't something that we should be not approving this plan for. So therefore I will be happy to support and approve this plan.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. It's always a pity to see that plans are made that do impinge on people's personal amenity. In this case, someone's backyard, their balcony, their living rooms, and things like that, which initially were being planned to be, in complete sight of a window in this development, a window that is generally, probably at what you would consider 2 stories high. I know that the building does start, it's a sloping block, sloping in 2 different ways, so the building does start at single level in one top corner, but it's certainly at 2 stories at that point, well above the existing fence line. And of course it's great to see the conditions that have been put on that. But it would be nice to think that the design could have been done so that that wasn't an issue from the beginning, that that, you know, the consternation's already been caused by this immediate neighbour, not to mention, of course, the surrounding neighbours. And I note that the objectors do point out that this has happened in the surrounding area. For whatever reason, this area has taken its fair share of backyard developments. And whilst I agree with the lament from other councillors, I don't think it's because people don't want backyards. People have children, people have dogs, pets, they do want backyards. It's because we have developers, we have people who can see an opportunity to increase their wealth by doing this generally. I don't think it's by choice that people say, well, I don't want a backyard. Nonetheless, this is what's happening. The questions that were posed, I suppose, by the representative regarding that privacy have been somewhat answered. But what is not answered, I suppose, is the density of this type of development seems to be undue in this area. Just anecdotally, just looking around today, but I know that the representative's also gone and counted the amount of developments in the area. And I won't bring it up now, I probably wouldn't be able to find it, but it's a substantial amount in a very small area. It would appear that it's almost doubled the amount of housing in that area. And people, of course, move to these areas not knowing or not thinking that this is what's going to happen in their local neighbourhood, that people will be looking into their backyard, that there will be increased traffic. It's an established area, so you don't expect that this is going to happen in suburban Launceston. It's not to say that this can't be successful, and as I'm told by our planning officers, many of these don't come to this table. It's the ones that do cause this type of consternation that we have before us quite often, because there are objections. I'm reasonably satisfied with the efforts that have been made to sort of mitigate the privacy issues, but I'm extremely disappointed that that was designed and considered to be an appropriate design for that area. I know that this building does step ever so slightly outside the design envelope, and for that reason I won't be supporting this development application today. I can appreciate that people are within their right to develop their land, but I can also appreciate that as a council we need to be cognisant of the things that we say that we're proud of in this town, which is its livability. In this case, whilst efforts are being made to mitigate the impacts to people's amenity, I think that this type of development needs to be more cognisant of its surroundings, and in this case I won't be supporting the development based on its impeding the design envelope, the allowable envelope for the building. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I certainly appreciate the contributions that have come before us, but what someone does who believes before the council meeting that a development application is not worthy of support is that they prepare or have prepared an alternate motion. Now, the alternate motion is then circulated amongst their colleagues so that on planning grounds, fellow members of the planning authority can determine whether or not to support the recommendation that has come before us from the planners or from the councillor. On 2 occasions today, fellow councillors have just decided during the meeting that they are going to go against the recommendation, as is their right, but without anything else to contribute to allow us as a member of the planning authority to consider an alternate motion that could be defended if it went to appeal. And I have an issue with that, because any of us can stand up and say what we feel, but what we're required to do as a member of a planning authority is to stand up and on planning grounds work out whether or not we should accept or reject a planning application that has been submitted by a developer, not whether or not we should accept or reject a planning development that has been put forward because we do or don't like it, or because we do or do not fundamentally agree with its principles or fundamentally agree with infill or not. And so if someone was serious about putting before this council a motion of rejection, they would have had an alternate motion written up for them, they would have circulated it, and we would have something on planning grounds to debate.
Thank you, Deputy. Any other speakers? No? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, I'll close, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for your comment, because that's the stance I take every time I stand up here, is to try and look at things on a planning grounds point of view. So if we're to knock something back, we actually have to have grounds where we actually think we can win it if we had to go to a tribunal, because the proponent, through all of their efforts, have come to put forward a planning submission. It's gone to our officers. We've advertised it. Objections have been received. Our officers have then assessed it and then determined whether we think we can go ahead. In a lot of cases, they come and they have some conditions which have been evolved from the conversations and the representations that have been received. In this particular instance, again, I think that if we thought we were going to hang our hat on a very small bit of discretion that was required in regards to the building envelope, I think given the conversations I've had with the planning office over about 11 years since I've been here, we would be on very, 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 very shallow ground. And again, like the Deputy, I like to sit here, and I sit here as a planning authority member to make a decision based on planning grounds, and as a consequence of that, I implore everybody to do it. It's very easy to say, oh look, I'll vote against it because we know it'll get up anyway. The reality of it is we sit here as a planning authority and need to make decisions based on planning reasons. We've been given good objective advice by our planning officers, and in my view, clearly in this case, whilst I might not like some of the outcomes that we're actually being asked to deal with, I know as a planning officer that's what my role is today, and I'll be voting in favour of it.
Thank you. With that, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against, that's 1 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. Move on to 9. Oh, Corinna can come back. 9.4. So we have a speaker for 9.4, Michelle Schläger, I think. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
It's okay. My name is Michelle Schläger. From Invermay, representing Walcott Surveys, and here in support of the Planning Department's recommendation to approve this application. It has been shown that the proposed is in accordance with the provisions of the scheme, and it is consistent with the purpose of the zone, being located in a residential area that can accommodate increased density. I would like to touch on a few points concerning the proposal and some of the raised issues. Car parking, as would reasonably be anticipated for this residential use, has been catered to and is fully contained on the site. Privacy and overlooking to nearby properties has been managed and designed to be minimal in effect, and there is no reason to expect any blockages to the laneway to the rear of the building as a result of this development. The surrounding area, although it contains notable buildings and dwellings, does not exhibit a single heritage characteristic, but more demonstrates an evolution of building styles over the last 150 years or so. The proposed represents a current, authentic aesthetic. It does not seek to replicate the surrounding buildings or create a false facade, and to do so would be considered inauthentic. The proposed also represents the current need for smaller, low-maintenance dwellings with access to services. And I would also add, in relation to any assertion that this development would affect neighbouring property prices, apart from not being a planning consideration, is purely speculative and cannot be foreseen with any certainty. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? Is there anyone I have down? No, thank you. So 9.4, someone happy to move? Councillor Harris, move. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it.
Thank you. I thought I'd better do not let Councillor Mackenzie have to move all of the tricky ones today. This one at Littleton Street, at an outset, did not appear to be one that I would like to support. But having visited the site this morning, I was impressed by the common sense approach by the architect and the developer to how to best utilise this site in an inner city setting. They didn't try to build 2 storeys. They only have 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, which is pretty good. They have 2-car garage at the front, which is accessible off Littleton Street in an existing driveway easement. They're moving another a garage further up for the existing property, which will require another crossover to be extended. It doesn't really overlook or overshadow along the right-of-way, which runs along its property boundary on the southeastern side, I suppose you'd say, but also gives that bit of privacy to those people on that side at Clarence Street to their backyard. So this is actually a very well-developed common sense development. Interestingly, that the land is exactly 349.5 square metres when the minimum lot size should be 350 square metres. But I do think to deny the application based on half a metre or 5 is perhaps being a little bit pedantic. So I'm quite happy to support this development application as proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And again, having sort of lived in this area for a large part of my life, I know the issues of it there, and it's a very interesting block of land they're dealing with on a corner of a very busy street. And I guess in relation to the building itself, pretty much it fits within the building envelopes. It's overlooking and things like that, I think, are 8.8 metres and various things. So reasonably well set back, even though the people at 22 and 24 Claremont Street will be impacted just because of the topography of the land as it slopes away. The reality is there is a right-of-way, and provided the right-of-way is treated in its appropriate way, then I don't think that will be an issue. I think there's a comment about sort of sight lines when they come out of that laneway. At the moment, there's a brick garage right on the corner of that right-of-way, and as I understand it, actually the garage is going to be set back further, so it may well actually improve the sight lines getting out of that right-of-way. To me, the major issue was traffic. It's a very busy area, Clarence Street, Claremont Street, Littleton Street. That whole area is impacted by a lot of cars at various times during the day, be they rat runs for schools, be they going to hospitals, be they going to medical consultancy rooms in the area. So there's a lot of activity going in and out of there. Again, I asked the question about, because this one either will have to reverse into its driveway or reverse out of its driveway, and I think legally they're supposed to come out forwards so they can reverse back in at a particular point in time. We're not the authority in relation to whether people do or don't do the right thing. Ours is just to determine whether the access out onto the street is actually going to be safe for the proponent to deal with it. As we currently see, there is actually a garage already there. Right on that street, so it's actually already accessible from that point of view now from that street, so it's actually not going to change the impact of the egress in and out of that street as a result of this building or dwelling being thing. It'll actually, I think, be in the other area that is likely to change. So the reality of it is I don't love the streetscape from the point of view of traffic, but the reality of it, I don't think we're changing it all. I think we're putting another crossover in, is the change that we're having to the streetscape. Yes, we're densifying the area, which is what we were talking about in the previous one. The planning scheme allows that to happen, and this seems to be fitting well within the envelope there. They've got their 24 square metres of private open space. So as a consequence of that, it seems to meet all the criteria of the planning scheme. So I'll be supporting it today.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. I appreciate the comments from Councillor Mackenzie there. It was a concern of mine too, the traffic in this matter, but as he rightly points out, it really is not such a change in its current use, really. It's an existing garage there, which I will note is, I know the planning scheme can't determine this, but it would be lovely to think that the bricks, the old red bricks there that look like old Mackins or something, might get recycled and reused. They look like they would be the perfect candidate for that. So I only hope that if this development application is successful, that the developer might make sure that they are either reused in their development or made available for someone else to reuse. Yes, it is problematic when these things happen. What I suppose is one mitigating factor here is the laneway and the fact that this development doesn't back directly onto another property. It makes it somewhat easier for the developer to maximise the use of that space, and I do note that that space is very confined, as Councillor Harris points out. Yes, we won't quibble about half a metre, but nonetheless these regulations are there for a reason. I do sort of think that by and large a lot of effort has been made to make this development appropriate for the site, and while I appreciate the neighbours' concern that this could happen elsewhere, and it may well do, that there are other people who are planning to do these things in the area, I will be supporting this development application. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close?
I'll just say briefly that I think everyone has said it all. The recycling of the bricks is an interesting one. The Machin bricks, I'm sure, would look good in someone's perhaps front of the garages or otherwise. It is a busy time at school pick-up and drop-off, and certainly trying to get access to the St Luke's Hospital. I guess in time, that hospital may well end up being relocated to the health precinct down near the LGH, and so perhaps that will relieve some of that particular traffic that is generated there. So I do encourage you all to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 9.5. We do have a speaker, Thomas Gunn, for 9.5.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thomas Gunn, 28 Olive Street. Apologies in advance, I won't speak quite as eloquently as some of the other speakers. The application before you is subsequent to the one we had in 2019. As you all know, that was denied at the time, and as a result went to a tribunal situation. Unfortunately, the tribunal couldn't make a finding on that, although they indicated to me that they would have overturned that decision. They weren't able to make a finding due to a issue with relation to the paperwork, and therefore making the application invalid. During the entire process, we went through a mediation process with myself, Richard, and my neighbours, and discussed within some of the things that they would like to see me make changes to in the current application. And I've done the best I could possibly do to address all those concerns that they've had. And above and beyond that, some of the things in relation to now with the noise and things like that, the windows at the back of the property, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but they will be getting blocked in with core-filled concrete block, so therefore that's going to actually prevent any noise pollution and prevent any light pollution from the rear of the property, as opposed to what's already approved for the site. In relation to the parking, it is already approved as a two-car garage. The parking is just being moved further down the laneway to an open car space. So therefore there's no extra usage of the lane other than what's currently approved. There's a greater turn-in radius for all the parking than what's existing. There was, I'm just trying to think what other concerns there were. There were some concerns raised as well about the fact that the entire thing was built from scratch with the intention of being an Airbnb. The original approved plans were 2011. Airbnb didn't exist in Australia until 2012, so it's clearly not the case. Some other statements made by the neighbours in regards to
Your time is up. If you could finish up, it'd be good.
No worries. I just wanted to say that I appreciate all your time and everything today, and I appreciate the time of all the planners that have put into it. And if you've got any concerns or any questions about it, I'm sure the planners can help you out as well within the the scope of the planning scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. So 9.5, move Councillor Walker. Seconded Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to Councillor Walker?
Yeah, just briefly, Mayor, thank you. I appreciate the efforts that have been made to resolve the issues, as we just heard from the representation from the developer. I can also appreciate the angst that has been carried by the neighbours, and I suppose I would ask and hope that they can see that efforts have been made to address those issues. It would appear that the private land at the rear of this property won't be used for cars turning around. I hope that's made very clear, whether it's signage or paint on the road or whatever it might be, that additional efforts can be made. Maybe they are already being planned, I don't know, just so that that doesn't cause further consternation of those neighbours. This is an area that's been developed previously. There are multiple units. The developer is fortunate enough to have access to this laneway besides his property, and that has enabled this development to occur. Now that those efforts have been made and these resolutions have been committed to, I sincerely hope that the neighbours can see that this would appear to be a solution that should be acceptable to everyone. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Mayor. Always good to second a motion for Councillor Walker. It doesn't happen very often. The other thing that is being done is a fence will be built where the existing parking area is to make sure that the residents or visitors to the unit don't try to park and therefore block the right of way, which I think is a very good it's a great improvement over what's there, because clearly if you look at what we saw today, if you're there trying to park on that, you would have to encroach onto the right of way. The extension to make a deeper parking spot and to be 2 bays wide is to be congratulated, as Councillor Walker said, so happy to support this revised motion.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we should also pay mention to the maintenance of the right-of-way. There's been some concerns about this current developer not taking part in the maintenance as he should. So I think, look, if this is going to work now, this retrospective application approval, there's going to have to be some really goodwill between the applicant and the people who are already in situ in those residences, because we know that when these kind of things start, sometimes they take on a life of their own and snowball into further issues around the community. So very, very important that everyone takes a step back if it's approved today, and then can try and meet the challenges of managing this site together in a way that everyone will benefit from.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker, wish to close? No? I'll put the motion then. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Just a reminder now, we no longer sit as a planning authority. So then we move on to councillor reports. Any councillor reports? Councillor Harris?
Just a couple, Mayor. I joined you and Councillor Mackenzie at the ABCDE Learning Site Celebration for Youngtown on the 21st of July, and I'd like to thank Sarah for her wonderful work that she's been doing in this particular program. I know the residents of Youngtown really enjoyed it, and it was great to see the film that we were all privileged to see at an earlier meeting, but certainly a great program, and I'm really pleased to see it's continuing on in Kings Meadows. I also had the pleasure of attending the TAS ICT drinks with the Premier and the IT Minister, Minister Ferguson, with yourself and also Councillor Mackenzie. That was a thing on Monday night, and it just proves how accessible it is for us here in Tasmania to gain access to our state politicians, but also then to raise issues with them directly, which I took the opportunity to do so. I should mention too, Councillor Mackenzie was also at the ABCDE Learning Site celebration. Hydrogen 123V was a breakfast that I attended again with Councillor Mackenzie on Wednesday, busy day Wednesday. That was about how hydrogen will work as a end-to-end process, from developing and creating it to delivering it, storing it and putting it into a vehicle. Quite an exciting project, and I do look forward to hearing and seeing more on the hydrogen industry, and I do encourage all councillors, and in fact those who may be listening, to perhaps get their head around what this can mean, because this is really a particular game-changing industry for Tasmania, because we will have the opportunity to create green hydrogen, that is with our hydro-created power, which is a pretty compelling argument in a world that wants to decarbonise the world. I also participated in a Healthy Tasmania consultation period for the state government for the next 5-year plan on Wednesday via a Zoom session. It was quite an interesting exercise, 36 people on one Zoom call, with all of us having the opportunity to have input into what the Healthy Tasmania plan for the state government may look like over the next 5 years. It'll be interesting to see whether some of my suggestions were taken up. And finally, I joined you, Mayor, at the Regional Visioning Workshop, along with all the other major northern councils, Meander Valley, Northern Midlands Council, Break a Day, West Hamer, and of course us from Launceston, at an NTDC-sponsored event, trying to help understand what the future for the Northern Tasmanian region could look like over the next 20 to 40 years. And so that was a very worthwhile exercise, and I do encourage everyone to perhaps have a look at the share packs that will come out of that, particularly regarding the economic activity that's been occurring within Launceston over the last couple of years. I think that was a very interesting summary that was presented to that workshop. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? Councillor Spencer.
Just got a thank you from the Monaro Club for having a lend of the car park in Bathurst Street a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to the President the other day and he said, mate, he's thanks for letting them have the car park. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? Move on. Questions? No questions on notice. Questions without notice. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Daking.
Just one thing, Mayor. Just in relation to the AFL that's coming to town again and the changes with COVID and the masks, as it's a council-owned venue, UTAS, who is responsible for making sure that the patrons wear the masks? May not be relevant to here, but I've been asked a lot.
I would assume individuals are very responsible that they wear them themselves.
So who would be responsible for making sure
That'll be a government health department. I don't think so. I'm not sure. Jim?
Oh, look, I'd have to look into it.
Yeah. Not. Anyway. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. After reading the Examiner today, it was reported that the council will guarantee for GPH in 2 contracts for Patterson Street car park. Is that correct? Or someone from council reported that we were not when I further read it?
CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So obviously those matters are subject to closed council determinations in respect of the response provided. There's nuance to that. So again, we would need to discuss that in a closed session. So we'll answer that.
It was just in the paper and I just read it and I thought I'd better ask the question about it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No, thanks.
Councillor McKenzie, was it a question?
Two, Mayor. First one just on the back of Councillor Daking's. I guess because it's required to wear masks on Saturday, I guess the question is, if somebody turns up without a mask, whose responsibility will it be to... I mean, it's something we'll need to consider on the basis that if council's expected...
That has been taken into consideration, but we're encouraging people to bring their own.
Okay, thank you very much. So my second one was just in regards to comment made by Councillor Walker in one of the development applications today, as to whether, just in the spirit of our recycle, reuse concept that we actually have adopted at council, as to whether either at the planning level, whether we do, and if we don't, whether we should be or making recommendations to developers that in the event that they're demolishing anything on their site, that they try in the spirit of things to actually ensure that they recycle and reuse the product. And maybe that's part of just the pack that we send out to developers when they put forward things. I don't know whether we do now, but if that's something that could be considered.
CEO.
Certainly something we can look at, Mayor, in respect of the ability to be able to alter the planning scheme to require it. You probably got limited ability to do that because of the Tasmanian planning the directives in terms of what we're dealing with, but that doesn't mean that you can't include notes on permits, and which is what I think you're alluding to. But we can certainly look at that.
Any other questions? No, we'll move on to committee reports. 13.1, Municipal Emergency Management Meeting. Someone happy to move that? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Seconded. Councillor Mackenzie. Wish to speak to it, Deputy? Councillor Mackenzie? I'll put the motion. Anyone else wish to speak? No, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's all councillors present. That is carried. So we move on to 13.2, the Heritage Advisory Committee. Councillor Walker moved. Councillor Mackenzie seconded. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Walker?
Oh yes, just briefly, Mayor, just to make note that just as has become a bit of a theme of the moment, that the committee has been looking at the salvage and reuse of building materials. I know that our Heritage Officer has been speaking with our waste disposal recycling team about that. I know these things aren't easy because it's obviously quite often the case when it comes to building materials that it adds to the cost when you have to handle, dismantle, move and store these types of building materials. But I'm sure that with the right sort of mechanisms in place that we can certainly encourage this, and maybe the council will have a role to play in terms of providing expertise or storage. There might be any number of ways in which we can assist in that process. I do note that we have also in the report there the dates for the 2021 Heritage Awards and Open House. The timeline is there for anyone who wishes to look at it, so I won't go through it other than to say that the launch event is booked in for the 12th of August. The topic will be learning from the past, looking to the future, so which probably places us very firmly in the present, and being able to sort of learn from our past, which is very much an integral part of Launceston. Any other parts of the report? The new Welcome to Franklin Village sign has been installed, so anyone driving out there on Hobart Road might notice that that general precinct at Franklin Village, as people would know, apart from Franklin House, there are other associated buildings, graveyards, I do believe, the church, that's right, yeah, it's just good to see some attention focused upon that and how that could be slowly, that area could slowly be improved, I suppose, even all the way out to the Stone Bridge, which isn't too far away from there. But other than that, I think that was all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we move on to 13.3, Launceston Access Advisory. Councillor Dawkins moved. Seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Dawkins?
Yes, just briefly. We met on the 9th of June, always a really interesting meeting. We were able to hear from the Access consultant for the Albert Hall project, which is really great. I mean, we want to hear from Access consultant on every major project. That's exactly what we should be doing. From our whole of council approach to a whole of development, whole of community approach is the only way that we're going to embed the needs of people with differing abilities into every aspect of community life. Disappointingly, we heard from the Churchill Park designers and consultants. I'm not sure if I've got the right word there, I don't think I have, but really difficult access with the current new designs for Churchill Park for people with mobility issues, which is troubling because we want these kind of spaces to be able to be used by everyone. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to resolve that problem. We kind of put it on notice that we were disappointed with the outcome of that particular meeting and hope that we will hear that there could be some revised plans which take into consideration those with mobility issues. We were reminded that in Tasmania, in December, the Tasmania Disability Festival is going to be held, which will be really exciting. And again, that the Access magazine has been launched, and we hope for many more. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we go to 14.1, I think we're up to. Workshop reports. Councillor Harris moved, seconded by Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it?
Just an indication of what's going on in the council. I think everything is listed there for anyone who wants to read it.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. No. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 16.1, Launceston Access Advisory Committee, Terms of Reference. Councillor Dawkins moved, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Dawkins?
Yes. It was, it's time for us to make these recommendations to the Terms of Reference. We had to change some of the language around, aldermen and councillors for a start. Also, it's indicated that there could or should be 2 councillors on this committee. So I know that everyone's time is pretty tight, but there is an opportunity for the future for another councillor to join me on this committee. We will make some changes again moving forward as far as the representations from the industry, but also from the community themselves. We need to hear from more people with lived experience. It really is one of the most interesting days that I have in a quarter, is to come in to that Access Committee and listen to and just observe the way that people communicate with different levels of communication capacity. You know, it's astounding and it's exciting, and it gives me so much promise that as a council we can listen to a wider range of voices. We've got our access strategy, we're implementing some of the components of that, but we've still got a lot more to do. I would hate to think that we've got this far with our strategy and we're unable to keep moving to embed some of these ideas within council policy and procedure. So this is something that we just needed to do. It's largely uncontroversial, but please, could one of you consider joining me on this committee? Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Mackenzie? Councillor Mackenzie wishes to speak.
Yeah, I'll address what I was going to say, because I was really going to address the comment that was just made by Councillor Dawkins in relation to the fact that we actually have 2 nominated members on there, so we're slightly in breach of our conditions and terms on there. Having sort of been involved on that committee for a number of years prior to Councillor Dawkins taking on the role as chair, I can only endorse it further for others to go and consider it, because it's really, I think, it's very insightful for any of us to sit with people with disability, whatever nature that they may have, to understand some of the issues that they deal with every day when they go out into the streets of Launceston or go to work or whatever it is. So I really do put forward and endorse a second person putting their hand up to join Councillor Dawkins on that committee, because I think you'll learn a lot out of it, because the people with disability in this community add a lot to the fabric of who we are as a city and a place that we want to live and we want other people to live. Everybody should enjoy the beauty and the splendour of Launceston City. And as you'll find, if you join that committee, not all can enjoy it quite the way that we do.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dawkins, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 16.2, the interim art policy. Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor, you wish to speak to it?
Look, just very briefly, obviously one of the hopes, goals, aspirations, dreams of the cultural strategy was to see our city come to life in terms of the ability for there to be street art that helps tell our story, the ability for there to be more art, the ability for us to embed that in a process and a policy, and here is the beginnings of that. I think it's been mentioned in the documentation, and we know as a council that this is the beginning of a process. There's a lot more work that's required, and I think what we will find when we get a new manager of the QV Mag, once we get our reference group, once this idea of art and public space becomes much more similar to the disability framework, once it becomes something that is regarded across the whole of the organisation, we'll see some real wins. So I think this is necessary. I think it's needed. It's not a nice to have. It's absolutely important for us to tick off some of those goals in our cultural strategy, and lots of work and workshopping has gone in to getting it to this stage. So I would encourage councillors to support it.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. Three questions.
Yeah, no.
Just in relation at a time when we were actually discussing it at workshop, I had two questions that really came out. Is really, I guess, who approves the public artwork? I guess from the point of view of making sure that the artwork is appropriate to be put on public display. So how is that mechanism dealt with? And I guess the second one is just the artist's rights and how we manage those in the context when we approve somebody's art to be put up, as to whether we have any control over it, because we might do something that's okay in the trend of where we're going today, but in 5 or 10 years' time, the direction may go in a slightly different direction, and therefore the trending or the where we want that public artwork to go may mean that that needs to move on or change. So just how we regulate all that.
Tracy.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. In terms of the controls for determining the appropriateness of the artwork, there are a number of other policies that will ensure that obviously it's not offensive or misappropriate in any of those ways. So we believe that there's sufficient policies across council to monitor that. In terms of the moral rights, I did a little bit of research for you on that one. There is the Copyright Amendment Moral Rights Act of 2000, which protects artists' moral rights in terms of copyright attribution and protection of work, and that's for usually 70 years following the creator's death.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it?
Only briefly. I had a interest in this particular policy due to being contacted by some street artists who wanted to do some I guess, real street art around the city, and found that it was almost impossible for them to do it without the policy we've now got before us. So I commend the council officers for now getting us to having a interim public art policy, which has a life of just 2 years, because they realise that you'll never get it right the first time. And so I think that is to be encouraged, and I do encourage those out there who wish to have some street art design perhaps put on their building to come through the process and help us identify any issues that we might have in regard to that, because I think that street art is something that will help liven up our CBD and in fact our suburbs as well, in appropriate places. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, a question again?
Yeah, just to follow on from that last one with the moral rights, I guess that runs me into a slight potential problem, that we might have something there that we do want to change within the 70-year time frame, and as to whether we have the ability to condition when we approve public art to say that this is the time frame for which we're approving it, and therefore either determine the destruction, the decommissioning of the property at some future date, whether that's something that we ought to consider. I just think it's something we need to have a consideration about before we enter into doing these things, so that we actually have an ability to do something and control the spaces that we own.
CEO wishes to comment.
Just in response to the question, obviously there's still work that we have to do around the development of a strategy, and I think that's the mechanism to be able to determine whether we do have, artist agreements or other sorts of formats of controls where you are able to, to change over art rather than wait to the moral right expiry. But nonetheless, that's something we'll investigate through the development of the strategy.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sure that, everyone would like to encourage, the creative pursuits and to see, that kind of expression in our community. Of course there are concerns. Of course we are a heritage town. We want to see appropriate art in appropriate places. Who gets to decide that? Well, there's been some discussion of that, but I'm sure that's an ongoing discussion. This policy, to a fair extent, refers to incorporating public art in public spaces that the council has jurisdiction over, as well as wanting to encourage private developers to invest in that. You could ask, the question, what is art? But we won't discuss that today, I'm sure. It's more a matter of allowing this process to begin, encouraging the process and encouraging the discussion within council and within the community too. I would be the first to say that, you know, there are many parts of Launceston that I don't think require any sort of jazzing up or anything like that. That the community's built heritage speaks for itself. It doesn't require interpretation. It's already there, open for interpretation. But there are many, many parts of our town too that really are undeveloped, bland, requiring, or, you know, would be desirable to see them enlivened somewhat. So it is going to be a nuanced discussion. I'm sure that the councillors will be involved in that discussion, that it won't be purely the council officers or the general manager who's making those decisions as they come along. But I'm sure that, you know, everyone in the community will follow that process and be active voices in that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. I just didn't wish my questions to be seen as being negative towards the concept of public art, because I'm actually a great supporter of the concept of it, but we just need to make sure we're careful what we wish for, that we actually have some parameters around what it is we do, so that we actually control our own public spaces in a manner that should be done. But certainly I think in the cities that I've been to where I've seen public art displayed, it absolutely adds fabric to the communities that you're in. I take the comments that Councillor Walker said in regards to where they're in appropriate places. Sometimes it's not appropriate to do those sorts of things, but certainly public art, I think, will actually give a life and a soul to this city different to what we've got now, and I think empower and do a lot of things which I think will be great for the creative arts. And given our cultural strategy that we approved some months ago, it fits very nice hand in glove with the sort of concepts of what that's all about. So I'm certainly very supportive of it. I just want to make sure that we're in control of the process and that we don't find that we're on a runaway train.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Deputy Mayor, you wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, and certainly appreciate the conversation around the table. I think the great thing is, with so many other local government areas leading in this particular focus area, we don't need to create from scratch the strategy and the guidelines and the principles, because there are so many wonderful examples of award-winning local government areas that have exceeded community expectation in this particular area. So it references the ability for us to learn and to model our strategy on the work of other local government areas, local government authorities, and I trust that that's the case. Obviously, as has been mentioned, the interim policy before us with the development of the strategy to occur. And I think importantly, I was speaking to General Manager Hurst the other day, the opportunity for us to celebrate those elements of public art that the city already has through an online portal, the opportunity to tell the story of what those elements of public art that we already have, who are they by, what do they represent, where are they? Let's celebrate them a little more. And she agreed, and that work will no doubt be happening as we speak. So certainly recommend the interim policy that's before us for endorsement.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 18.1 towards 0. Moved Councillor Dawkins, second Councillor Dakin. Councillor Dawkins, do you wish to speak to it?
You. I'm sure everybody has plenty to say on this strategy. At the moment, as we speak, there are floods in Germany and in China. There's fires in Sardinia and Canada. We know now the way that these kind of events with fires create their own weather patterns and their own environment, something that we've never really had to consider before. So this is never going away in our lifetime now. All we can try and do is manage it, and currently our state and federal leaders are leaving us really to manage it ourselves. We are in an enviable position here in Launceston and indeed in Tasmania, because we do have an abundance of renewable energy. But there's obviously still so much more for us to do. I welcome this document. I think there's a lot to really like about the way that it's laid out. I like the way that we celebrate the wins that we've had in the past, because we have done some really good work. We talk about what we're doing currently and how we work towards 2025 and zero emissions. There's some very particular things around the hierarchy of emissions, which I think are really, really important to remember. The offsets and maximising our efficiencies, but also, of course, avoidance and reduction of the very activities which create carbon emissions. We've done so well with our FOGO and so well with our waste transfer station. It really is absolutely brilliant and everybody should be commended on that, but we can always do more. And I know Councillor Walker's had a lot to say about recovery of building materials, which I think is the next really most important step that we make. We have got to do better. I think the whole country knows this. Anybody who's involved in construction and waste management knows this is the next very big place to work. And I know we do some work with NDDC around our circular economy grants and these kinds of things. These have to be now perpetual. This is not something that we do, pops up for 1 year and then it goes away. This has got to be consistent now with all of our strategies and everything that we implement. There are so many challenges: sea level rises, rainfall patterns. I know Director Abhart would know only too well, or General Manager, apologies. That the overland flows that we experience in the valley, you know, the amount of issues they create for individuals and for community services and for the emergency services management, it's big and it's going to get bigger. And every time we have one of those really intense precipitation events, we know, we can see it, we hear about it, it's on Lonnie Chit Chat, it's in the newspaper, everyone's been affected by it. It's difficult living in a valley, there's absolutely no doubt about it. Our strategic direction is really clear. We are going to cut emissions. Are we going to offset the ones that we do create? We are going to become carbon neutral, and as I said, our 100% renewable energy really helps with that. Our Cities Power Partnership starts to lay out some of the strategies around that. I know Councillor Harris will have something to say about sustainable transport. We don't seem to have got very far with cycling infrastructure. We're doing okay with active transport, that we still have to do more. We do have a bit of cognitive dissonance between the planning process and then our strategies now. You know, we have to remove trees as a part of building new dwellings because, of course, people need dwellings. But at the same time, now we have to plant trees because we've got a hot and heating city. So some of these things we really have to balance out how that works because we need to plant more trees. You know, we can't just be planting the trees that we remove for dwellings. You know, it's an absolute imperative to continue to do that. So I think all in all, it's a brilliant document. It's laid out clearly. We are leading in this space. There is action in this space. You know, we're even drilling down into the minutiae of how we are offsetting our investments in fossil fuels. There aren't many councils around Tasmania that have taken that sort of step. And for me, that shows the depth of this work, and I commend the officers who have contributed to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. It's one thing to declare a climate emergency. I think that was the easy thing. It's a whole other ballpark putting a plan together to deliver it. And I commend our CEO, who's just left the building, Michael Stretton, and our Director, General Manager, Shane Eberhardt. You look at what you've been able to achieve as a council, and I stand here and I'm proud to be part of the council. The projects that Councillor Dawkins just listed, I mean, Australia's first landfill gas capture. It's here in Launceston. That's pretty cool. It's not pretty cool. It's showing that we are leading by example. Largest curbside FOGO. Upgrading nearly 4,500 lights. I'm sure Councillor Spencer will be happy with that job. A lot of people don't actually know in the community what we are doing as a council to do our part for, obviously, the climate emergency. And again, it is just fantastic to see. The great thing I like about this plan is that there are deliverables, we can track it live, and we're accountable. So I'd like to, again, say thank you to the staff for putting this in place.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Yep, I think we're one of the leading councils in Tasmania about this. Fuel reduction, I think we can cut by buying more efficient heavy tractors, trucks and dozers. I've just purchased a tractor and it's using 50 litres less diesel than the other big one we've got. I cannot believe it. But this is what the council needs to do now. Find the best vehicles, heavy vehicles on diesel that you can buy. I think that's the way we've got to go. The street lights, 4,800 we're going to replace, which is great. LED, more efficient, last longer, cheaper to run. Rooftop solars we're putting on our buildings. It's all great stuff. To go to zero emissions in 2025 is going to take doing. And the council's leading with FIGO. I've been talking to Shane and about building materials and the guy from the TIP that organised it, the Waste Centre. That's going to be the future. All the building products go straight to the tip face at the moment. No good. Half of it you can use again. It can be crushed, used for firewood or whatever. But this council is leading the way in Tasmania with the emissions, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the previous speakers and also to the council officers, I should say, for their work in putting this document together. Only on Monday at Rotary, I was asked by a new person to Tasmania, what is council doing in regard to emissions? Because my Rotary Club has started a small battery recycling project to raise awareness of the problem of throwing a AA battery into the rubbish rather than sending it off to be reprocessed through a metals reprocessor. And when I was able to list, having just read the report on the weekend, all of our first, he was taken back. He's new to Launceston, he's been here about 6 years, but a South African by birth. And when he had heard that we'd been doing the gas capture off the tip for the best part of, well, more than a decade, he was absolutely very impressed. I guess from my point of view, as someone mentioned, it's great having a report. We now have to put the rubber on the wheels have to hit the road, put the rubber on the road and actually do what we're saying we're going to do. We are good at doing some of this, but we now need to perhaps potentially go to the next step. And that is, as Councillor Dawkins said, we need to start to build our off-road bike paths if we are to encourage more people to cycle and leave the car at home. And we need to have a think about what our city can look like, and each of us needs to make a personal commitment to how you will make a difference to the planet, how you will perhaps one day a fortnight come to town in an alternate form of transport, whether that be your feet, whether that be sharing a car or the bus with others, or in fact riding a bike. Each of us, and not only around the table here at Council, throughout the Council workforce is perhaps a great place to start, but for any of those listening out there in the rest of the community, we need to think about how we can make a difference to this. And just imagine if everyone who came into Launceston to work in their office job or in their retail job in the CBD, one day a fortnight chose a different way to get here. Someone made the comment that the Metro buses would be overloaded. What a wonderful example for Metro to have that they had so many customers they couldn't pick them all up. So that is really where it's about. If we are to make change, well, we only do a very small thing, a little bit like my Rotary Club collecting the small AA batteries. It is a first step. I've had lots of interest from the other 47 Rotary clubs in Tasmania who want to do the same. And this is where, from small things, big things will grow. So, look, I really do commend this to everyone, but it's now time for each of us to consider what action we can take to help this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. I'll just note we're short a week of 2 years since the motion for climate emergency was brought forward by Councillor Daking, so we should celebrate. But I guess what I really like to see in the policy that's there, and I guess the one thing I've found over the last year or so, we keep getting beaten up about what's, we signed this climate change emergency thing 2 years ago, but what are you doing about it? This is what we're doing about it, and I hope Adam and the Examiner will report about what we're actually doing about it, because we see letters to the editor and a number of other things who seem to be very naive about what the council are actually doing in relation to this, and we are leading the way in many things in this country, I think, in regards to what we're doing. Can we do more? Of course we can do more. We've got limited resources to do some of the things we are, but we've got to keep pushing the envelope in regards to it and challenging other people in regards to what they're doing about it in other jurisdictions that are around us. And the best way we can do that is set by example and say, don't talk about what you can't do, talk about what you can do. And I think we found, as challenging as some of the things may have been, we've actually taken them on board and we're actually taking them forward. I take the comments made by Councillor Harris in regards to the alternate transport. You know, the transport vision is all about that particular aspect of how people might move in and around the city in a better way over time. Not happening as quickly as maybe Councillor Harris and I might like in regards to some of the cycle transport or the walking transport, but I also understand it's a big project, you know, trying to retrofit things into a city that are not designed for some of the modes of transport that we now would prefer to use. But having said that, the vision's clear in regards to the transport vision about what we're trying to achieve. The bus depot in the middle of the city and all those sorts of things are the sorts of things that are going to add to that and give us the opportunity to do it. But again, I like the idea of all of us setting the example around this table. Think about what we do at home in regards to the single-use plastics and all those sorts of things that we actually take as commonplace in our own house. We can actually do it by doing things. And I really look at things now and I try not to use single-use plastic wherever I can now. So we can all just take little lessons from what we at a council level are doing and put it back into our everyday life. And I challenge all of the ratepayers of Launceston and beyond to think about that as well and take that challenge on personally, and then we'll all be better off.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Most of it has been said, but what I wanted to do was just reference what I think is great about this document is it sets out our own commitments as an organisation while also empowering the community and setting out a way forward for the whole of our community. And I think as been referenced around the table in the challenges that have been set out today and previously, Councillor Mackenzie, we each have something to do in that space, and in doing so we celebrate what the council is doing, the leadership that we're showing, but also empower, but importantly provide our community with the tools to assist, because in many instances there is a desire to do better but a lack of the knowledge of how or where to go to get the information in order to implement change. So I think this document does that in a great way. And I think we're really lucky, Mayor, to have someone of Sophie's standards who's new to the state and new to our council helping us in this area, setting an outstanding example, and we look forward to her work into the future also.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I congratulate Councillor Daking on having moved the notice of motion to recognise that we're in a climate emergency a couple of years ago now, and also the council efforts to respond to that motion. Of course, the council have been doing things, you know, before myself or Councillor Daking were on council, but sometimes it is good to focus these things through the vehicle of a motion. And for that to be conveyed and communicated to the community. The list of things are there, and I do also thank our Sustainability Officer, Sophie Hipkin, and General Manager Everhart for the work that has been done up until this point, and encourage us to redouble our efforts. As can be seen from the report, a large amount of our carbon emissions come from our tip face, from the waste cell, and that's something that's difficult for us to deal with. It is something that is difficult for us as a community to deal with, the waste that we generate. There's been talk today about building waste and the difficulties involved in trying to separate and recycle that. So too, in our personal lives, we do all contribute to that waste. We are all producers of carbon. Probably most of us have been today, and that will continue. But this is not to put the guilt onto the individual. This is for the council to represent the community in that pathway forward, and to encourage the private businesses in our community to follow that lead. In some cases, there are businesses that are also leading that way, and that's to be commended. But individuals can do so much in their own lives, and that's great. And I think most people that we encounter are doing that and are conscious of it and wanting to make that effort. but the message has to go to businesses. Sometimes it's not cost effective to be conscious of these things, but businesses have to make that choice. And as consumers, we need to help make that choice with those businesses. So yes, it is great. The council is, we're fortunate in Tasmania, we have renewable energy, that makes our job easier as well. But that's not to say that we rest on our laurels. We are global citizens. You know, welcome to the global community, Launceston. Let's forge ahead, not just for the council, not just for individuals, but for the businesses in our community now to step forward and to show that leadership as well. That's where, as a municipal area, we can make the greatest gain. So that means builders trying to identify ways in which they can recycle the waste that is produced from building sites. It does mean that hospitality businesses, hotels, restaurants, look at the waste they are producing and find ways to improve rather than just thinking, well, that's just a cost of doing business. They find ways to improve that. Hospitals, healthcare providers, aged homes, schools, all look towards what the waste they're producing, not just the individuals, because yes, we can all do so much individually, but we have to spread that further in our community and into the areas where it hasn't always been economically viable to do so. So that's where I would encourage people who will read this document and will see that the work that the council is endeavouring to do, and I do think it is substantial, not just in Tasmania but on a national stage, that they do see that and that they join in that process wherever possible. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dawkins, wish to close?
Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers. I think this is something that we've all got a stake in, as is evidenced today by all of your words. As far as individual capacity to be able to bring about a positive result here, yes, I agree. I agree that it's down to all of us, but I think in the past we've been let down by our leaders. You know, we had priced carbon and it was working really well for Australia. Unfortunately, it fell foul of it was politicised and we lost it. And now with the current negotiations with the EU and trade, you know, carbon will be taxed. We will be taxed $90 a tonne, and it will be to the detriment of our communities who are trying to export into the EU. So we need positive leadership, we need individual capacity to be a part of this, and just to remind everyone that we can also recycle soft plastics. I am that person who goes through all the bins at home, does everyone's heads in, puts all the soft plastic into bags and then takes it back to RedCycle. And I notice that when I'm doing that, very few other people do. I don't know that the inhabitants of my house know why I'm doing it. I'm sick of trying to tell them why I'm doing it, trying to get younger people engaged in these kind of conversations. Can see their eyes glaze over pretty quickly. So it's up to all of us to do it. You know, if you feel like you're doing it and to no real effect, there is an effect. The more of us that do this, it's absolutely worth the effort. And I know I flagged in the past, and I'll do again so now, that we're following the work that's been done in Hobart under the bylaw to remove single-use plastics from the LGA, and I believe between all of us that we can do that on this council before our term ends, and I really hope that we gain support for that.
Thank you. I will put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.1, budget. Councillor Mackenzie moved. Seconded. Councillor Harris. Councillor Mackenzie.
I guess this is the exciting part of the agenda, the bit that we've all been waiting for all afternoon to get to. Numbers, numbers and numbers, but unfortunately that's what we're driven by, the numbers. And I think Nathan and the team have put together fairly understandable documentation. And at 19.1, clearly all we're dealing with is the Accelerated Capital Works program, and where we're really switch hitting from one program to another program. Basically, it's just meaning that we're not increasing the capital works that we've spent, we're just moving it from one budget item to another budget item. So really, that's the purpose of agenda item 19.1.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, the budget amendments. Moved Councillor Harris. Seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Harris?
someone should always speak to a motion. This is just more budget amendments as detailed coming up to the end of the financial year. Thank you.
Councillor Mackenzie, wish to...
Just a little bit, I mean, it's just the analysis. We do projects during the year where we think they're going to be capital projects and they end up being operational. They're operational projects which end up being capital. And it's really just a matter of when the officers get to the end of their line items and look at them and determine which one they are, and therefore there's a movement to reflect that.
Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close. I put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. 19.3, Budget Chief Executive Officer Report on Adjustments. Moved by Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Again, I think it's all explained.
Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. 19.4, some budget amendments. Have a mover in Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris? Councillor Mackenzie?
Again, just reflective of items that we thought we were going to get funded for in the 2021 financial year, which we're not, and we'll get funded for in year 2022. So they'll appear in an item coming up soon.
Any other speakers? Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we get 19.5, and the CEO wishes to comment first.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So in between the publication of the agenda, we've had further discussions with councillors around particular item 12.2, which was a proposal from the Hobart City Council to conduct a workplace health and safety review for elected members. We had discussed previously a notice of motion, but the view is and the recommendation is being altered to supporting the Hobart City Council motion, and so that's in the recommendation now. So.
Thank you. Someone happy to move in one lot, the whole lot, or do we want to go through it line by line? One lot. Who's moving it? Councillor Mackenzie, and seconded Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I'd just say that we've actually had the matters discussed at workshop, and we've gone through it, and as the CEO just mentioned, some conversation that went after the workshop, which then has refined our view in relation to one of the items on the agenda. It's interesting that somebody said today that should we be as councillors making the report rather than the officers making a report to us and making our own decisions in regard to it. I personally think the officers are actually probably better skilled in some of the areas to actually give us advice in regard to it, but the very fact that when we go through it at council workshop, we get the opportunity to question and challenge each and one, which has happened in the case of one of those, and we've therefore changed the recommendation. So I think we're still very much in power of the decisions that we're making.
Seconded, you wish to speak?
Yeah, just briefly. I'd just like to thank everybody for, I guess, entertaining the idea of changing that motion. I think it was the right decision, and thanks.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.6, City of Launceston Annual Plan Progress. We have somebody to move. Councillor Harris, come on. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris, just to speak to it.
Only that it sets out how we're going against our plan, and it is always good to review plans because plans are guides to help us, and sometimes when you go back to look, you're often surprised just how much you've achieved, and I found that over the past. And looking at this, most of the annual plans seem to have high numbers, 70, 80%, 100% in quite a lot of them. So we are making good progress against our plan.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Just briefly, Mayor, it is quite rewarding, I think, when you look at the breadth and depth of things that we are working on. Many, of course, are council-initiated strategies, programs, projects, or things that have been significantly enhanced through conversations and workshops, which is great. I take on board what Councillor Harris says, and I also note that many are near completion or indeed are at the other end of the scale, and I think that is always the case. We always undertake a desire to do more than perhaps we're resourced to do. I'm sure, like others, I'm really looking forward to, on page 1, the development of that regional sports facility plan. There's lots of merit, I think, to come from that. But in highlighting that as an example, I think we need to celebrate all that we have achieved and note that there are still some things to be completed, as there should be. That's the work of an organisation such as ours. And importantly, to reiterate how one body of work can continue to feed into another. Not that something is completed and it's done and it's off the list, but how then we can continue to, through our ongoing mechanisms, strengthen, enhance, develop, learn from what we've achieved and undertaken.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer.
The capital works one where it's paused, it's a great idea. Civil contractors are all flat out, so I think I'll take the hat off for Michael and Shane for pausing that, and hopefully we can bring that back in another 12, 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. 19.7, Local Government Code of Conduct Framework Feedback. Someone happy to move that? Deputy Mayor. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy?
I think it's all there, Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Dawkins. Any councillor wish to speak to it? I will put the motion. Those in favour, raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we now have a motion to go into closed council. Moved Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Spencer, that we go into closed council. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. So now we'll go into closed council. Open, councillors. So we have a motion to endorse the decisions taken. I haven't seen the wording of it yet, have we? Or... Oh, is that it? That's it. Moved Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Daking. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. We'll close the meeting. Thank you.
Is everyone going on?